Hello, and welcome to my show, Searching for Integrity. My name really is John Smith, and I'm searching for people with integrity. Why? Because our country suffers from IDD, integrity deficit disorder. Today, we have as our guest an author and with quite a book she brought with her. Her name is Regina Griego, and you are there. We said hello.
Hello.
I like that part. Um, well, let's talk about your book, and let's talk about you.
Great.
You have a geez, what should I say? You have a tremendous amount of patience, is what I would have to say, and what you've done and what you intend on doing. Um, it's when we get through this book, as we talk about it, I bet my people in the audience are gonna they're gonna want to look at it. Your title is "Sins of the System: Trauma, Guns, Tragedy, and the Betrayal of Our Children." How much of that? Can't take much of that. And when I see that and I talk about all the children, um, I'm still stunned about the Uvalde situation was.
Absolutely.
And I looked at it. I've talked to people what happened, and for me, it was possibly um, the cops bailed. Is a good way to put it. The cops bailed. They didn't charge it. They didn't do anything. They did everything wrong, and then when there was time, you couldn't find them. That was just terrible, 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 terrible. Um, how can you find some cure of that? Other than the guns. The guns were from a crazy student. Um, had you looked at that? Thought about it? Talked about it?
Yes. And that's largely a story that part of my story in the trauma, guns, tragedy, and the betrayal of our children. Um, it's a similar story. There were signs beforehand that this young man was troubled, and he was not counseled or taken or has seen what the family situation is. Newtown is another example of a young man. Most of these mass shootings are done, like 95 or 99% are done by males age 18 to 25. And it just ought to raise a flag as to what's happening with our children, in particular, these young men. I think there's an awful lot of loneliness that young men experience. And that combined with the proliferation of guns, we have more guns in this nation than any other nation on a per capita basis. And there's easy access to guns. And it's no surprise that the states that have very lenient gun laws are the ones that have an excess of mass murders and gun deaths. It is sad to say, as a nation and as an adult in this nation, that the number one killer of children is guns. Half of those, it's on the order of 19,000 a year. Half of those are, 2/3 of those are homicide. I would say 60% are homicide, 30% are suicide, and then the rest are things like accidental deaths. It is sad as a nation that we don't address that and put our children before the proliferation of guns. Now, my story was tragic, and it's similar to the stories that happened with these mass murders, because my nephew killed 5 family members. My brother, his wife, my sister-in-law, and 3 of his siblings. So there was a 9-year-old, a 6-year-old, and a 2-year-old that were killed that day, January 19th, 2013. And when I found out about it, all of our family was together trying to figure out what happened. And when we found out it was my nephew, it was a shock, because we hadn't seen any indication as to why, at least nothing that we had seen, why this happened. And so my first instinct was to go see the young man. And ultimately, within a week, I took guardianship of him. And I did this because I knew the state would not treat him well. And I loved my brother, and I loved my nephew, and supported him through 7 years of hearings. And he was initially, he made a plea deal, and then he went through what they call an amenability hearing, which is just a hearing that they determine whether or not the child is salvageable. Now, in that period of time, we found out that he had been very isolated. He was supposedly homeschooled, but actually they stopped teaching him at 3rd grade. So at 17, he was tested as a 3rd grader. And he jumped 4 grades in the period before the amenability hearing. And so he was found to be amenable. He was also going along with therapy. It took us a year to stabilize him, because he had basically a psychological break. Now, I'd like to make the distinction between mental illness, true mental illness, and what happens to a lot of these young men, especially, where there's a sense of despair, and it becomes almost obsessive in their heads that they need to do something. It's a behavioral thing. It's a mental, I would say, crisis, rather than true mental illness diagnosis. Now, some of them may have true mental health illness, but my nephew was diagnosed with trauma-induced schizoaffective disorder and with severe depression. And we've come to find out that his dad was training him to be a soldier. My brother was one of those that believed that he was going to have to take on the U.S. government, and he also beat his son on a regular basis, and he knocked him out at age 11. So he had a traumatic brain injury. But in the end, after a second set of hearings, after an appeal, the judge determined, well, we don't have any place to put him. He's aged out of the system. He was 21 at the time, maybe 22. And so they sent him to prison for life, plus 7 years. So in New Mexico, life is considered 30 years. It's not your natural life, but it's 30 years plus 7. And I believe that a lot of these young men are truly troubled, and it puts us in a position where when there's gun violence, there's an excess of guns, the children that get killed, or the people that get killed, is one thing, but the family that, of the young man that did the shooting is also dealing with something that is beyond belief, because now you're in the juvenile system or in the incarceration system, and you basically lost that person in some ways.
Well, you really have, you got a lot of guts. That's what I can say. Going through all of that, trying to help your nephew. Are you in touch with the nephew? Is there still any communication with him?
Yes, I sent him, or me and my husband send him money regularly. That we're his only, connection to the outside world, really. And I talk to him weekly for about an hour. And the good news is that over the last 5 years, I've fought for legislation with a New Mexico Coalition for the Fair Sentencing of Youth. And just this year, we passed what we call a second chances law. Now, mind you, some of these kids in New Mexico are put in adult prisons as early as 15 years old. Now, my nephew went through the juvenile system for 7 years, got a fair bit of mental health treatment, got, even medical type stuff that his parents, his dad didn't ever take him to the doctor. His parents never took him to the doctor. And so any residual illness that he had there, and also his education. So he was lucky. He didn't go in straight away. And that was part of the reason why I stepped in, because there was a very good chance that they would just send him off immediately. And so he didn't enter the adult prison system until he was 22. But with this second chances bill, initially he wasn't going to have a chance at parole, even parole. He does not have a release date, but he was going to get a chance at parole when he was 52, almost 53 years old. So imagine this young man who's been incarcerated, was basically incarcerated by his father, incarcerated by the juvenile system, incarcerated by the prison system, the Department of Corrections, and he doesn't get a shot at parole till he's 52. What does he have to hope for, to try, to get up in the morning for, So part of the second chances bill is to give these kind of cases that are not, first degree willful or multiple counts of first degree willful, a chance at a parole after 15 years. So that means that he'll get his first shot at parole in about 4.5 years. And then if he doesn't get it then, he can go up again in 5 years. So now he has something to try for. And now what we have been working on is to get him in what we call medium security and get him into programming where he's studying something like HVAC. He wants to do some sort of vocational training.
Well, it's good that they offer that kind of stuff because it has to be so well done. And it's all on hope, HOPE. I know it well.
Mm-hmm.
She, it's hard not to admire you. It's just, just to do what you've done, and you're still doing it. I don't know. Go ahead.
The idea for me, it wasn't almost I hate to say conscious choice. I felt drawn, I felt called to take this child to the point where if I didn't do it, my soul would not be at peace with me.
Right. And certainly you can have that feeling about it. And the beneficiary of that was the nephew.
Right. Who was a young man. In some ways, he was a victim himself of a lot of things that his father did. And of course, in the book, what I try to show is the generational trauma, because my brother also suffered quite a bit of trauma as a child, but he also was in the 82nd Airborne. And I'm convinced that between his experiences as a child, the military, and he joined the gangs after the military in LA, that he had post-traumatic stress disorder. And I also think he had a TBI himself, because he was a gunner and carried one of those high-powered guns on his shoulder and had a helmet on. And every time, you shoot one of those things, it knocks your brain around, kind of like playing football or whatever like that. Because clearly what we found afterward was indications of a man that was not completely right in the head. He was a hoarder. He had his son call him commander or general. He would give ranks to his son. He was a sergeant by the time he was 15, which is when he committed this crime. He, like I say, regularly beat him to try to put him in, make sure that he was going to do the things that he asked him to do. It was a very odd growing up, and this young man, it's the luck of the draw that he happened to be born into this situation. And there's a lot of kids that experience that. And generational trauma is not unusual in families, certainly not in New Mexico. We have a fairly high poverty rate, and child poverty in particular. And so these kinds of things happen with children. And the question is, as an adult, what is our response? And how are we going to keep these kinds of situations from continuing to happen? The other legislation I fought for with the Moms Demand Action, which is a part of the Everytown for Gun Safety, is a child access law. We called it Benny Hardgrove Law, and after a young man that had been killed at a middle school. But basically, to hold the gun owners responsible if a child gets a gun and takes them, either brandishes the weapon, that's a misdemeanor, or if they actually cause bodily harm, that's a 4th-degree felony against the gun owner, which is often the parent.
Doesn't sound bad to me. It's corrective. Let me ask you this. When we were on the phone, I think our first conversation, you had said to me, it's happened in Maine. And this was a couple of weeks, maybe 3 weeks. This was a grown man. He was an Army reservist. And from looking at it, I've seen some articles on it, about it. Even though he's a grown man, he still has the same kind of characteristics and motivations. Right. And all of that. It's like, how do you take a being and make such a bad being out of it? It's whoever the person was trying to lead it through life ought to be hung. Little circle. Right. That's.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was a tragic situation. Again, mental. People will say, the ones that defend the guns will say things like, well, you have to address mental illness. It's not the guns. And the answer is both. In most of these situations, it's not either or, it's both. Because other countries have mental illness, and not too far in terms of variation from ours. But other countries do not have the lax gun laws that we do. And this man that shot those people in Maine had been diagnosed, had actually been in a 2-week mental health treatment center prior to what was happening. So they must have not conducted a background check adequately. You just don't hand over these weapons. We have a law that we passed, moms worked hard on this as well, an ERPO law called Emergency Protection Order. And it allows a family or allows a person or even a caregiver to be able to take weapons against somebody that's away from somebody that seems compromised from a mental health perspective. And it doesn't count against them. They don't get any kind of ding on their from a legal perspective at all. All it is a way of taking custody of the guns for a period of time until that person seems well. So I don't know if he had the guns, because I didn't read as deeply, before he did the killing or after he was, before, how long he had them before. So whether or not he got them before he had his mental health treatment, I don't know. Excuse me. But in any case, weapons have to be removed from people that are compromised.
Problem is, we don't know if they really are or really not, unless somebody asks for it.
Well, it was clear in this case, given that he had mental health treatment.
Right.
And of course, assault weapons ban is one of the things that's being talked about now, both in our state, but in general. The number of mass shootings went down dramatically after the last ban. And I think we need to reinstall it, reinitiate that, because I don't think people need to be walking around with military style weapons.
I agree.
But go ahead.
I was going to say, go ahead, clear your throat. Get a big. There you go.
Sorry.
It's important. No, it's okay. It's all right. I look back to a time when I was a young drill sergeant in the Army, and I was the honor graduate of my drill sergeant school. And as I looked at, I don't really know why they go to Nam and how long they'll be there. I don't know. It's like, what could you? How do you predict something like this?
I don't know that there's a way specifically to predict it, in terms of like how people act out after post-traumatic, through post-traumatic. I do know that there is not, well, in our culture in New Mexico, there's this sense that you don't ask for help. And probably in general, men do not ask for help as often as they should, especially if there's a mental illness or mental crisis is still got a sting to it, or a bad thing. It's a bad thing to ask for help, and that should not be the case. And I know there's many organizations that offer support for veterans, and I think all veterans could use the support. I mean, even those that don't end up, owning guns or whatever like that, just in terms of balancing their life. Because, you talk about integrity. Humans were not created to kill other humans. It damages our psychology.
Right.
Whether you do it in war or in other situations, you are doing something that is against the nature of humans. And so you are affected by it, even though you convince yourself that you are not. And I honestly believe that one of the reasons why we send 18-year-olds to war is because at that age, the frontal lobe is not mature.
Right.
The brain is not mature until they're 25 years old. So they can be convinced to do just about anything at that age, and of course, there's a lot of militarism in this country. Now, I totally respect the people that give their lives and serve our country. It's just the pervasive nature of things like militia and police that are overly armed, let's just say, is a little bit too far from a perspective of that militarism. And the other thing is, it's not that I'm against guns, you know, I'm against irresponsible use of guns, you know.
Right.
And I know I have a lot of friends within my, you know, I was an engineer for 30 years and knew a lot of people that were hunters and had weapons and had been military people. But they were all responsible, and responsible gun ownership is what our goal should be. And that's true in Germany, and that's true in other European nations. And it's not that, you know, we want to take weapons away from people. That's not the case. Now, when I say assault weapons, that is a different altogether, because it is a military style weapon. But responsible ownership is what we're after.
Are you getting in speaking opportunities now?
Yes, I've been interviewed by several podcasts, and then also radio shows that people have.
Good, good, good.
Mm-hmm.
Sell a lot of books.
Yeah. Well, the 80% of the royalties are going to nonprofit.
Yes.
40% to the campaign for the fair sentencing of youth, and 40% to Everytown for gun safety. My goal is basically for the children. You know, sort of a very iconic case that happened here in New Mexico was a 16-year-old printing, because that's the other thing, 3D printing a Glock gun and taking it to school, having a 14-year-old take it from him. The 16-year-old pinned him against the fence. He got loose and he ran away from the 16-year-old. And then the 14-year-old turned around and killed the 16-year-old. Both families lost their futures with their sons. Right? Because that 14-year-old is going to be in the juvenile incarceration system.
It is. And
live with the fact that he killed another young man. And then the 16-year-old is gone. It's a shame.
Right. It is. It is. I keep thinking to myself, what can you do? What can you do? And I don't know. But we have people like you, like what you're going to do and are doing. So yeah, very, very, very important. You're doing a great deed. Let me thank you for being here today and giving us this information. I thank you, listeners, for tuning in to Searching for Integrity. And for my audios, so long and happy trails to all. Until we meet again.